Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you. My name is Steve Harmon. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Center for 21st Century Universities and the Associate Dean of Research here in Georgia Tech Professional Education. Welcome to the annual Center for 21st Century Universities Symposium on Higher Education. We haven't had it since the pandemic started, so this is our first one back in person. I think it's our 10th one, actually, that we've had, so we're very excited to have you here today. And also very excited, I'm sorry I'm behind you, all of you guys. I'll come out so do that. I'm also very excited to have this wonderful panel of presidents from the three R1 universities here in Atlanta. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. Our program this morning is we'll have the president's panel, then we'll move on and have a little coffee break. Then we have a panel on AI that I think you'll find very interesting. We have three national AI institutes here at Georgia Tech, and one of them focuses on adult learning and online education. And by the way, President Fenves, just last night, I got the Emory magazine for this month, and the cover is the future of AI and what Emory's doing with that. So it's a very relevant topic for that. And then if you manage to stick around after that, I'll close things out with a brief overview of where we think the future of higher ed is going and how we're responding to it. So without any further ado, we have a video greeting from Mayor Dickens. Mayor Dickens was planning to be here but couldn't make it in the last minute, so he sent us a video instead. So if you guys will hit that.
Hello, I'm Mayor Andre Dickens. Higher education has always played a critical and evolving role in our society. Here in Atlanta, we are blessed with three top-tier research universities, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, and Emory. There are only two other cities in America that can match that, and that's New York and Philadelphia. That puts us in some pretty rare air, and is certainly a selling point for our city. As someone who draws circles of inclusion as opposed to lines of exclusion, I welcome the opportunity for civic, educational, and business collaborations. And I appreciate the broad roles that our institutions of higher learning play. The pandemic reshaped our world economically. In a post-pandemic world, there's a need for even more meaningful collaborations. We cannot afford a disconnect between those ivory towers and Main Street. Our universities are major sources of employment for our city and help provide our government and businesses with a smart and capable workforce. These universities have helped drive our city's recovery. And in our efforts to move Atlanta forward, we want to work closely with our research universities to help problem solve for our communities. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the discussion and ideas that will come from your President's panel. Enjoy today's symposium.
We will convey your applause to the mayor. Without further ado, let me introduce Provost Steve McLaughlin, Provost here at Georgia Tech University, who'll be introducing the presidents and leading the panel this morning.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks you all for being here today to experience this conversation about the civic role of universities in a changing educational landscape. As Steve said, I'm Steve McLaughlin, the Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Georgia Tech. And before I forget, because as this was going on, you just might notice that among these three institutions and the mayor, what's common among all of them? 4 engineers. Isn't that remarkable?
Wow. Wow.
I know. And so I'll be moderating this panel discussion this morning, and I'm really, really excited to get started. I'll introduce our panelists before we go. And I think you're going to find some of these questions as maybe a little more hard-hitting than a typical panel session, because I think we want to get to the heart of some important issues. So let me introduce our panelists. Dr. Brian Blake is the president of Georgia State University since June 2021. He came to Georgia State after 2 years as provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at George Washington University, and where he oversaw the academic mission of that institution. He holds bachelor's degrees from Georgia Tech, master's degree from Mercer University, and a PhD from George Mason. So welcome, Dr. Blake. Dr. Ángel Cabrera has served as the president of Georgia Tech since 2019. Before he came to Tech, he was the president of George Mason University for 7 years. As an educator and administrator, Dr. Cabrera has sought to advance professional ethics, internationalization, and corporate social responsibility. He earned his master's degree and a doctorate from Georgia Tech, and he was a Fulbright scholar here at Georgia Tech. And finally, Dr. Greg Fenves is the president of Emory University with a career in higher education that spans over 3 decades. President Fenves is a distinguished researcher and educator, as well as an experienced executive leader. At Emory, he has focused on initiatives to improve the student experience, recruit and retain world-class faculty, spur research breakthroughs, and reinforce the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So welcome to 3 of the 4 engineers. I'm going to be in so much trouble for that. So I think I'm going to go straight to President Blake with the first question. Universities have traditionally been associated with place. The campus is the university, but the pandemic says that this notion is really on its head now. Campuses shut down, but universities didn't. To what extent does place matter to the university?
It really does. I mean, I think history has taught us this twice now, at least. If anyone remembers the massively open online courses around that time, maybe almost 20 years ago, maybe not that long ago.
10 years ago.
We thought that was going to disrupt the idea of students wanting to come to campus and be a part of place because they could take their courses at home. Technology's changed over that time, and I think some universities have adopted a lot of the learning technology that came out of that. But for the most part, universities continued, and students kept coming to campuses, and the campuses continued to get more engaged. The pandemic was another where, basically, as a provost, one of the things that I look back as one of my failures is that I went for 2 years asking, can the campus just have one thread of classes that students can take all of their prereqs, their general electives, general requirements online? And I got, yelled down and everything else, and then the pandemic comes and we go completely online in 4 days. So ultimately, within 6 months, parents, students, faculty, everyone's asking for students back on campus. So I think there's something about the personality of a campus, the community, that really keeps our students, our faculty and staff engaged. So I think that part is hard to replicate. We didn't do a good job of doing that. Obviously, we couldn't do that in 4 days. But I do think what has occurred that's been very helpful is we began to think about the campus in different ways. We had 3 different categories. You had fully online, you weren't here. You had fully in class, and then you had like this in residence online. And that forced us to think about a different modality of how we would teach students in this era. So I think it's important for us to use this as a time to evolve our place, but I think it will always be a part of kind of what college and K through 12 education is going to be about. So I think it matters.
And to Dr. Fenves, kind of adding on to that, some more of our external stakeholders, whether they be the mayor, whether there be members of the larger community, what are the messages we need to be sending to them about the importance of place, about the physicality of the universities? Are they missing things around the importance of the university? Do they fully appreciate us being here? Are there gaps? What are the messages we should be sending to them?
Well, first of all, I want to echo what Brian said. We conducted a massive natural experiment. And I think we learned a lot from this experiment about the importance of the campus for education. And I wish, I've said this many times, I wish I could bottle the joy of students when they were first back in-person classes, because we just took it so much for granted. We could learn a lot about how to improve that on-campus experience, whether it's in the classroom or on the other activities on campus. But we're also research universities, and that's a sense of place. That's a sense of excitement and innovation and creativity. That can't take place online. That's people, humans interacting with each other, thinking up new ideas. Obviously, in places like Georgia Tech and our universities, the laboratories and the facilities and the infrastructure have to be located in a place. But to your question, Mayor Dickens doesn't need convincing. So having elected leaders like our mayor who understand the importance of what our universities, all the colleges here, including the AUC campuses, what they add to this city in terms of being able to attract people to Atlanta, to make this exciting. When companies are thinking of locating here, when companies are thinking of starting here, they want access to the students, the faculty, the ideas. And some public officials don't understand that. They see this as a cost. Well, we don't pay taxes. You're public, so you never have to pay taxes. We don't pay taxes.
We take taxes.
But we'll take taxes, yeah. So, but it looks like just a burden. I think Atlanta is so fortunate to have leaders that have understood what the importance of our universities are doing.
Well, there's kind of a natural transition from, either what we communicate to some of our political leaders. We talk a lot about what we're good at, what we do well, but and like we hear from the AAU, we hear from others that the national narrative is not always so positive about higher education, and maybe we need to change the narrative to what it is we're good for. And I think President Cabrera, if you want to talk a little bit about that, it is important that we say what we're good at, but how do we change the narrative, or how do we engage more nationally on what it is we're good for?
Yeah. Well, let me first start by thanking everybody in this room, because what Brian said, how we sort of turned an entire enterprise, not just in one institution, but across an entire industry overnight, within 1 or 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. This grand experiment that we'd never planned, but we were forced to run, as Greg says. I don't want to wash over that without recognizing that behind that historic effort of transforming an entire industry were individuals like everybody represented in this room. And I recognize many faces. There's some from other institutions, and every single person here and all of our colleagues, everybody had to figure it out. And so anyway, I hope when we're retired and telling stories of the awful, terrible pandemic years, I think we all have pretty amazing bragging rights about what happened during those 2 years has been nothing but remarkable. So one of the things I hope if we can battle a few things, including that genuine joy of togetherness when we were able to come together. Also, this self-efficacy maybe of confidence in our ability to change, to innovate, to question the status quo. So I hope that stays with us. But that's a great question, Steve, about what we're good for. It goes without saying, but it needs to be said because it's, as you say, polls are not terribly kind to universities. And if you take your favorite city in the United States or in the world for that matter, in terms of a place where you would look to start a career, to raise a family, what you would hope your children or your grandchildren would go to, a place where if you're an entrepreneur where you would want to give it a shot and try. I bet you that whatever top cities appear on your list, and each of our lists will be different, I bet you each of those places is anchored by at least one top research university. And it is not by accident. It's not by accident. The economy of the 21st century is driven by talent and ideas. It's an economy driven by innovation, by change. It's not by access to natural resources. It's not driven by some of the typical factors in the 20th century. It's a different deal. And in that concentration of talent and ideas, which I guess technically you could produce in other ways, we have not come up with any other way to build concentration of talent and ideas than through these research universities. This bragging point that the mayor mentioned, which we kind of had fun with one day. It was actually, we posted this photo on social media when we realized that we may be one of the few cities in the country with only 3 R1s. What the part that doesn't show in the photo is who took the photo, and that was Paul Judge, an alum of Morehouse and Georgia Tech, and an entrepreneur, like sort of the archetype of what's happening in Atlanta. He's the one who was taking the photo. And so that whole scene, the photo and the person who doesn't show up in the photo tells a story. I mean, there are not many places in the world like Atlanta with this concentration, and not just, I mean, by the way, this is the R1s, which are essential. Research universities are essential in those ecosystems. But then you have other very important pieces. You have the HBCUs, you have some other colleges to create really an ecosystem that makes us really unique. That whole story, that cycle of how universities, research universities create value, activate community, really build prosperity, create opportunity, that's a story that we need to tell better. I mean, right now we're kind of losing the battle for public opinion. I mean, every time we're exposed to polls, whether it's AAU or APLU, they're kind of bad. Part of that only maybe the way some of the questions are framed, but there is a lot of negativity about, and if you think about the opportunities that we generate, the amount of economic activity, I mean, you just cannot control. I just close by, when I think of place, sometimes I run this, it's a very silly, it's a very silly sort of thought experiment, but think if a Martian lands on planet Earth, and they happen to land in Spain, my home country. And they go to some of these very cool, beautiful cities that Americans like to visit. And they'll see cathedrals, they'll see big buildings, they'll say, wow, this is interesting what these earthlings build, and they would wonder what happened in these buildings, where these people pray to, that they will try to understand. If they happen to land in a great American city, what they would wonder is like, wow, what are these campuses? I mean, what happened in these people, these earthlings build these places where people come together and they learn and they experiment and they converse and they seem to, to do smart things in these places. I mean, that's really what makes a thriving community, a thriving city, a thriving country ultimately. So yes, a yes to the value of universities, yes to the place, and we're just terrible at telling all that story. We better get going with that. Yeah.
Well, I think part of that story, and I'm sorry, President Fenves, I'm going to feel like I'm going to put you on the spot here, but it's public versus private. And President Blake, you've been part of both public and private institutions.
Mostly public, but both.
Yeah, and I think the question is, I've been part of public institutions and really believe in the public mission, and sometimes we think of maybe that's different than the mission that private institutions have. I'm really curious about your perspective, having been a leader at a flagship public as well before coming to a prominent AAU private, and I'm really curious about, like, even in this context, perspectives on the difference between public and private, at least in terms of our overall public mission or our mission for good.
As you pointed out, Steve, so nearly all my academic career has been at public universities, large public research universities, and past 2 years here at Emory. So it has been an interesting learning experience, and what I have learned is there's no difference. The mission to educate, the mission to discover, to invent, to be creative, it's the same. The funding mechanisms are different. The governance is different. Kind of glad about that too. But what we do, the heart of what a university is, it's the same. And really, I think that is part of the brilliance of the American higher education system. It's very large. I think there are 3,000 colleges and universities in the country. There are lots of different choices that students have. There are different ways of doing things, but I think they're united by this mission for the common good, to educate students so that they are productive citizens. They're engaged in their communities and in our democracy. They're productive in whatever career they decide to pursue, or multiple careers over their time. And we're generating knowledge that is the public good. Most of our research is in the public domain. It doesn't matter if it comes from an Emory or a Georgia Tech or a Georgia State.
I'm curious if either of you have a perspective on public versus private.
Yeah, I am actually, I'm so weird in this sense, in the fact that I guess I went to a selective public in Georgia Tech as undergrad, went to a small private for my master's in Mercer University, and then I went to an access institution, George Mason, for my PhD, and then I served my entire career at selective privates. And then for the past year, and then I think I was provost at George Washington Drexel. Drexel's almost an access, open access. It feels more like a public-private. And then I'm like at Georgia State, where we're like this open access public. So I'd say I agree with all the things Greg has said with regards to what the mission is. But I gotta say, it's I do feel like there's a closer connection in my experience over this past year with kind of the local and local government region than I've had in my previous experiences, and some of that informs how we think about solutions to problems. So it really does feel like it's a closer connection to the community, a slightly closer connection to the businesses, and then there's an obligation, more so, to coordinate. Whereas I felt more like an island of my own when I was at George Washington. So I think as an administrator, you do feel that difference. I think as students, I think you get a similar product. So I don't think it's as much different from the student perspective.
And I think my next question might, I don't know, President Cabrera, if you have comments on it, but I think my question, because I think, Brian, you just mentioned this, and it triggered a Michael Crow statement about, moving from exclusivity to inclusivity. And I think we have a really, really a strong reputation private that might be viewed as exclusive just based on admission, but we also have a public that also might be viewed as very, very, very exclusive, and a public that's extraordinarily inclusive. And I think, and maybe the question is to the exclusives, because we say all the time how important of access and affordability is. I think we really truly believe in the inclusive mission that we need to embrace, but yet we still manage to be exclusive.
Right.
And so I'm curious.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating. It does create a very important and difficult dilemma for places like Georgia Tech. Less so for Georgia State and George Mason, because it's clear. You have a much clearer sort of mission of access. The question in places like Georgia Tech, we're public mission, we belong to the same system, and yet we're extremely selective, and increasingly so. We're swamped with applications this year. We had another record, 50,000+ applicants for an entering class of about 3,500. And the question is, how do you explain that as a public institution, that we are basically choosing not to serve tens of thousands of students, right? Now, and by the way, I'm with you, Greg. I think philosophically, there's philosophically, there's not a big distinction between public and private because a public university, a private university is really a public good as well. No one owns it, no one can buy it or sell it or profit from it. It's just governed differently and it funds itself different. But in practice, there is a difference. I mean, we have that immediate input. We get, this next year we'll get $450 million from Georgia taxpayers. And we have a governance system that brings sort of the voice of the voter more directly felt in our day to day. But so how do we justify that? One of the things I hope that we try to do at Georgia Tech is, first of all, is never ever define our success by selectivity, which is this this idea that has been pushed in rankings, and we're in this crazy industry, if you will, where the success of an institution seems to be determined by how many people you choose not to serve, which is nuts, right? So we know we cannot serve everybody, but we cannot get into defining our success by how many people we choose not to serve. That does not say anything good about who we are. So I would rather define our goal by how much talent can we produce, how much opportunity can we create, knowing that we have limited resources, we have limited capacity. So, for example, in the undergraduate program, we're growing. For years, we've been ambivalent, not sure. We said, no, we don't want to grow. We had all sorts of excuses. We said, no more excuses. We have to grow. Employers are requesting more of our talent. We're getting a huge growth in applications. How can we sit back and say, no, we're not going to? So we are growing. We cannot grow at the speed that the applications are growing, but we are growing. So we're going in very short time from about an entering class of around 3,000 to an entering class of around 4,000. But the other thing we've done is to look for opportunities where we don't have resource constraints, like with the online masters in computer science and data analytics and cybersecurity, where we've been able to create a model, high quality, low cost, that is now, those masters have become the largest masters of their kind in the world. Here's what's interesting. The online masters in computer science, we set up with Udacity, spin-off of Stanford University. Stanford never put any degree programs on that platform. Or as they say, they never ate their dog food. MIT, Harvard, they spin off edX, never put their degrees there. Guess what? 2 of our online master's programs use that platform. They never ate their dog food. So I love that about what we're trying to do, which is, can we find ways in which we can serve more people, produce more talent, create more value, as opposed to try to figure out how to maintain sort of that exclusive private club kind of sense that I don't think it belongs in a context definitely of a public university.
Can I weigh in on that in a different way? So I went through all of Georgia Tech, and as an African American student, I didn't have an African American professor. So I just missed Gary May, his class was full, and I just missed Dorothy Yancey. And although I went to go meet her after class once, you got to ask her the story. She kicked me out because I came in late, but it wasn't my class usually. So ultimately, after having a real successful K through 12, I struggled a bit here, and it did feel really isolated. Whereas, I did look to see other Black or African American students, and oftentimes there was like one other in the class, maybe. This idea of imposter syndrome kind of weighed heavy for me during my undergrad time. So let me juxtapose that on Georgia State and tell you just how special the place is, and I'll brag a little bit. The 55,000 students, or 50, I think we're 50, we'll be 54 next year. 40% of those are African American. So that's 23,000 Black students in one place. So we're bigger in just that category than most institutions in the country. 25% Caucasian students. So, 12, 13,000 white or Caucasian students. About 12 or 13% Asian American or Latinx, in both of those categories. So almost 10,000 in those categories as well. So when you walk on campus, we have huge buckets. You don't feel like you're you really don't feel like you're alone in any particular group. And I think what's so special about the place is that you see students walking around in mixed groups, and it's natural because no one feels like they've been isolated in any way. So I think that access piece is so valuable to putting together a microcosm of the country that really has a cultural sensitivity that, you know, transcends what they do as an undergrad. They go into society and they can speak any language. They're multilingual. And I think what's so special about Georgia State is that we're like one of the fastest growing research institutions. So, I mean, 200 million, we're one of the biggest without engineering, med, or agriculture. So you're not losing anything from an innovation standpoint. And you've got all of these, you have this environment that's so robust, so rich, so, you know, so inclusive. So I'll tell you what's funny about this, and you've got to spend a day there to see this in person. And even me included. So I've been educated in R1 institutions that really didn't have a real inclusive environment. So when I go into this really inclusive environment with students, I still have imposter syndrome because I'm working with a group that I've not worked with before. And our faculty are like that. And I think we're more diverse than most places in our faculty bar. There's more work to do. But they have to be absolutely excellent in innovation. And they also have to be multilingual. And they have to interact with a body of students that they have never interacted with in their life. So it's just this weird combination of things that you'll see. And I love it for our next generation institution, even for someone who's come from all places like Emory. So it's been, I mean, this year, I mean, I can't tell you how many nights I sit up looking in the ceiling, like, how does all this work? And, you know, why? And it does. And, you know, it's cult-like. Our community, very much, you get into this community, you don't want anything different. So I just think that, you know, next generation institutions are going to be some combination of what we're doing now. And there'll be some exclusivity as well, but I think it's going to move a little bit toward to that other directions.
And Steve, no, by the way, I hope for all of us at Georgia Tech, if it felt a little bit like a sort of bump in the gut, it should, because this is an alum. This is an incredibly widely successful alum who's telling us it wasn't great at Georgia Tech. And so we now on our strategic plan, that's one of the top areas that we're all focused attention to is how to make sure that we really bring every profile, every kind of student to Georgia Tech, and how do we make sure that no one feels like, oh, I am the one who doesn't belong. But we have a ton of work. Not everybody understands this. So I actually welcome the challenge, and as an alum, not just as a fellow educator, but as an alum, to say we have to get this thing much better. I mean, we're proud of what has happened since you were a student here, and I think you would recognize our campus, our student life in an entirely different and positive way, but we're by no means where we need to be. And I always joke when I was president of George Mason University, when I try to explain that in Georgia, I say I was president of Georgia State University in Virginia, because so we're very so I empathize totally with what you just described. Yeah.
Well, let me be clear. I do bleed gold, so I'm going to
No,
be critical of the environment, but I'd say place matters.
Yeah.
So
challenge accepted.
yeah.
I hope it's okay to continue this thread, because I'm kind of channeling my inner President Fenves here, because I think Emory, I know Emory's a neighbor. I live over in that neighborhood, and I kind of the story of inclusion, you know, from the outside, many see kind of the exclusive element, and so I'm really curious about how Emory views inclusion, and it includes probably things like Emory Healthcare and the kinds of things that you do. So I just wanted to give you a chance too.
Well, so Steve, as you mentioned in your introduction of me, my previous career, I spent a lot of time on diversity and inclusion, including defending affirmative action in the Supreme Court, and worried about what's going to happen to that in the next Supreme Court session. And again, having not been in private universities, one of the first things I looked at before thinking about talking with Emory were what are the demographics of the students at Emory? Because for all the reasons you've talked about it, the importance of diversity, the importance of inclusion on the campus. And what I saw then and what I see now on the ground is in fact, a more diverse student body than at the University of Texas. And this is the University of Texas is in a very large state, a very increasingly diverse state, very complicated state. And Emory, which didn't have any of the state laws, any of the issues around all of these questions, is more diverse than the University of Texas. So it is part of the public mission of Emory University, and it's very impressive. Now being on the campus for 2 years, we're not Georgia State, but it's, visitors come to our campus and just talk about just seeing the students in the class, our faculty. It's a surprise to some people. So it is a very inclusive place. We work very hard that students, talented students, no matter what their background, feel that they belong. Now, that's inclusivity. I don't think exclusive is the opposite, right? Because the difference between what I just described, the Emory student body, which reflects the values of the university, it's just smaller in size. So if exclusivity means scale, yes, we're exclusive because we're small. We're not planning to grow. It is just part of the way the university is structured and organized. But if you take scale out of it, we're a very inclusive university. And you mentioned healthcare. If we go back to the sense of place, I want to add two important aspects of sense of place that universities provide, and including our universities. One is the arts. We're places, especially at Emory, where the arts are very important. I think lots of people like to have access to museums and performances and music and plays, and that's a place the universities are very, very creative. That of course you want institutions like the Woodruff Art Center here, but also the young people coming in with new ideas. And then the other aspect is healthcare. Emory is the only academic health system in the Atlanta metro region. It's a very highly ranked healthcare system. I could go on about everything that was done during COVID, including Emory Healthcare having the highest survival rate of patients on ventilators during COVID. That wasn't just because we have great docs and great nurses, which we do. That was research and innovation that was taking place in real time. And it's academic health systems like Emory that takes the ideas from people's heads on the laboratory bench and can move them to the patients in the bedside very, very quickly and effectively. And that takes place at research universities in real places like Emory University Hospital Midtown, just a few blocks down the street.
I think I know the inclusion is just a major part of what it is we're all thinking about. I'm going to change tacks to the demographic shifts and kind of the cliff in the enrollment cliff that I think people think is coming in right around 2025. One of the things that you hear is that the top institutions, we get 50,000 applications. We might be immune to that the enrollment cliff, and our enrollment's increasing. I'm really curious about how all three of you see what's coming, 2025, what we're thinking about, how we're planning. Are the top institutions immune from that or not, and how it is we should be viewing that? And maybe I'll start with President Cabrera.
So the demography is one of the most sort of accurate in social sciences. You can actually do the numbers and see the waves coming, and you know exactly when they're going to hit, and this one is coming and it's going to hit higher education, and it is going to produce a shakeup. There's no way around it. There will be a shakeup. There will be, when you go through through a transformation of any market of that magnitude. Some institutions will suffer it more than others, and I'm going to even dare to predict that there might be institutions that don't make it. So, and others that will have to transform. Some will be more immune than others. I think when you have a huge buffer of applicants, like elite publics and selective privates, I think you're more buffered, but we're not going to be immune either. So I think we all need to be very attentive to that. There is a part of what's happening though, and in a different context, we had this conversation yesterday, but a part of what's happening, and I'm trying to really fully understand the data, is there is the demographic piece, which there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, it's coming. There's another piece of this sort of skepticism, growing skepticism about do we need to go to college? And I am really concerned about those debates, which normally are fueled by, and I think there's a cynical aspect to this whole thing. These debates sometimes are fueled by pundits who are claiming that children should not all go to university when they themselves have gone to some of our best universities, when their children will go to the best universities. And who I guess when I try to deconstruct what they're saying, is what they mean is, your children should not go to university. Mine, of course, will. Other people's shouldn't. And I think there's, back to the first question about how do we tell our story, we have to make it absolutely clear that in the 21st century, and there's always Bill Gates, and there is always Zuckerberg, and if you want to bet your life on the odds of becoming Zuckerberg, I mean, you have better odds of becoming LeBron James, even that you have to becoming. I mean, so if you're not, LeBron James, and if you're not Bill Gates, you better go to college. You better go to college. Well, but my neighbor is a plumber and does great. Thank you very much. Great. Do you want to? If you want to bet on your future, go to college. Okay, and we have to make that absolutely clear. Statistically, is the best investment, even if you have to borrow money to go to college, even with all the criticism and the cost, with everything, even with all of that in, the smartest, best, surest investment you can make is go to college. Yes, there is the philosophy major, pouring coffee at Starbucks, and I don't think that contradicts the argument. So the demographic piece we cannot do anything about, but oh my gosh, we need to do a much, much better job conveying the truth about accessing higher education. Yeah.
President Blake, as an access institution, what do you see happening?
Yeah, I think, I was a software engineer during the time of the .com era. So it's, if you could spell computer science, you could get a job. So it was a great time for us. But I'd say it was such a ramp up to Y2K. It was incredible. I mean, the hiring was occurring across different disciplines. People were changing their title. And, it kind of fell off a cliff. And then all of a sudden, it was limited to a certain group, and there was this larger population. And I'm not talking more about the cliff.com. I think the buildup, meaning that there was such a need for a period of time that we had to reskill. So when I look at the cliff, I think about first year students coming out of K through 12. So sure, there's going to be a smaller population of that. But on the other end of this, the baby boomers are retiring, and my generation is retiring. So it's kind of, I got a feeling that the jobs are still there. The nature of work hasn't changed. It seems like we're going to lose this population that would normally be the population that would fill those jobs. Now we have this Y2K issue for every discipline. So I think it's going to be really important for our campuses to not only focus in on those first year students right out of high school, but also focus on the reskilling, focus on being agile, so we can change our instruction, so that we can educate other disciplines that want to move into areas where we have scarcity. So I think that's probably going to be more of the nature. And institutions, like I like to say, institutions like ours is very comprehensive. We'll have opportunities to make those changes and to pivot in those ways.
Yeah, I'd like to add another thing, and I agree with both Ángel and Brian. If you study history, and we've got a social scientist here who understands this much better than I do, but demographics in some ways is destiny for a nation. But the United States is unique in that we have been a country that that on and off, I don't want to say all through history, but on and off, has been welcoming to people from other countries, talented individuals from other countries. And there's statistics like if you look at the largest capitalized companies started in the past 20 years, 40% of them, 40% of the founders are immigrants or children of immigrants. So this is a unique aspect of this country. I'm very concerned, especially with the demographic changes that are happening in the country, and will probably continue for quite a while, that it is going to be harder for talented individuals from around the world to come to the United States. And one of the biggest attractions are universities like ours. We have the best higher education system in the world. It may be criticized heavily. It may show poorly in the polls in the United States, but students vote with their feet when they want to come to our universities, and we have to continue to be open, because they usually stay in the United States, and they contribute to our communities, and they contribute to the economy.
And I'm sure it's on everyone's mind. No one mentioned it, but it was really around non-traditional learners, really expanding beyond the students, the on-campus kind of students, and that as an opportunity. There's a statistic here that Google recently announced it will provide any U.S. business with over $100,000 worth of online courses in data analytics, design, and other tech skills for their workers, free of charge. And so in that space, we're starting to compete with companies. Should upskilling and reskilling, that kind of education, be left to private companies, or what is the opportunity for us? That's kind of hanging on the rim, I think, for everybody. I think we know how we're gonna answer that, and that's really the context, I think, of C21U and some of the things Georgia Tech's doing. But I'm curious about how you all are thinking about non-traditional learners and kind of demographics or groups that we aren't touching. Who wants to take that first?
I'll take it. I'm a computer scientist and electrical engineer, so I love Googles of the world, the Microsofts of the world. But when I hear this credentialing as as some substitute for higher education and learning, it's like an insult to me. It's like, it really is. It's like, I've been doing this for 20 years. It's a real insult because if you think about it, when's the last time you had a good hamburger from Chick-fil-A? So it's like, in a year I can jump into this space and I can educate students better than, maybe I'm getting defensive here, but I would say, this is hard business. It really is. So sure, there are certain things that are very tied to one corporation that they may be able to train and then bring those students in, but think of how one-dimensional that is. And how it lacks sort of hundreds of years, thousands of years of kind of what has built our institutions, from, early learning, caveman learning to now. So it just feels like that piece is not really a competition. Now, the insult's on us if somehow we are not incorporating and evolving over time to allow for our students to have like this highly mechanized path, not just to business, but to government, public advocacy, to nonprofit. So we really need to be smarter about how we evolve our curriculum. But at the same time, I think we've just got a lot of built-in intellectual property in what we do that it's going to be very hard for companies to step in 5 or 10 years and try to get to that space.
Can I add on to something like that then, Ángel? So I'd be interested in asking Google how many of those reskilled students they're going to hire as Google engineers. It's probably kind of like the Mark Zuckerberg. If you get through the Google interviews, maybe a very small number. But what's important, I think, for a college education is that our graduates can get reskilled very quickly and easily. They've got the educational foundation, they've got the experience that allow them to be very flexible and innovative no matter what their career path is. Taking a high school student and saying, I'm going to take some of these online courses and become a coder, that education is not going to last very long.
This is fascinating. I agree with both of you, and I agree that, listen, there's a space for a Google certificate and an AWS certificate and all of that. But ultimately, AWS is a publicly traded company that wants to sell more AWS, right? And Google is a publicly traded company that ultimately wants to sell Google Ads. And that's it, right? So if you're trying to choose where do I go for my next level of training, you need to ask yourself, what is the mission, what's the purpose of this organization, and does it align with me? So it turns out universities are not publicly traded. Our goal is not tied to a specific product or not. And we have a series of institutions, often undervalued and misunderstood, that are there to guarantee your learning, the integrity of your learning. We have a thing called tenure, which basically guarantees that we're going to have smart, independent thinking faculty members who are not going to be swayed by the flavor of the month, or they're not going to be swayed by other things, who are just seeking truth, advancing their fields, and who, when they're creating a program, they're just thinking about, what is the best knowledge that we should impart. I'm not glorifying our universities. We have plenty of issues and limitations, and we're first to criticize ourselves. But what I'm saying, ultimately, what we stand, if you think, okay, what Emory University stands for, what Georgia State stands for, what Georgia Tech stands for, is a seal of approval, is 150 years or whatever it is of an institution dedicated to advancing knowledge, to being an unbiased seeker of truth, to developing better and better methods to help you grow and learn. So as imperfect as we are, that's what we do for a living. That's what our institution. So I think, once again, we better tell that story better, because we just don't have the same marketing pool as some of these other providers. But what we have to offer is really powerful and probably much better product ultimately than what any private provider will.
So we've touched on a whole bunch of different things so far. We've talked about universities and cities. We've talked about inclusion, talked about enrollment, non-traditional learners. So I do have more questions here, but I'm hoping to open it up to the audience and spend as much time, because I'm thrilled that there are so many people here. I know a ton of folks with probably some hard-hitting questions, and I'd like to open that up. I think Chen.
Hi, my name is Chen Zhou, Georgia Tech. I have a question, actually, start from President Blake. You mentioned that you didn't get very good K through 12 education, right? But anyway, so in this country, a lot of people, when they apply for universities, they're handicapped because they didn't get very good education, K through 12, right? Especially certain communities. In fact, you can even go earlier than K, right? So that's where they are kind of handicapped, right? Now, we talk about this session is about university role in changing landscape. Does the university have a role to play in that? That's my question to all three of you.
Indeed. So I would, I did fairly well in K through 12. I think if I look back at it, I think I would say my high school saved me to get through Georgia Tech. But I do educate a large number of students that do have challenges. They come from areas where they didn't get as much, expertise or preparation out of their K through 12 experience. So I do think we have a responsibility. Certainly, Georgia State has a responsibility for this, and we have it on both sides of the coin. Meaning, I think because we are a public institution, he said he get 450 million, we get 250. We got to talk about that. But
Next year's budget.
Okay, yeah. Right. But I'd say we have a broader mission to educate students from the state. And I love what we do in our perimeter campuses. We have several thousand students that matriculate through in dual enrollment, meaning they are in high school, but they're also taking college courses. So I think in ways in which we connect to that population and understand things we can provide largely comes out of our interactions with students that come from those areas. In addition, I think our School of Education has great partnerships with K through 12 schools in the city, which gives us more insight on how to provide next generation body of knowledge to support those areas. But at Georgia State, I think what's great is that once those students come, irrespective of what their preparation is, we use data analytics to figure out how best to matriculate them so we can leverage what they do very well and actually subsidize areas that would allow them to be successful and graduate. So that's been one of the most amazing pieces, just understanding our student body and then having the natural empathy on campus to really want to see them succeed. And doing that in a total abeyance of if it really matters to ring, because we have a spirit that says students will graduate, and that's our first priority. So I do think that keeping that empathy, working with K through 12, and then also meeting your students where you are, all those things are part of what we need to do.
Yeah, well, I would just add that, and that is a great question, because traditionally, I think the position of universities like Georgia Tech is, well, it's not my problem, right? I just do higher ed. If K to 12 doesn't work, go somewhere else to complain. Thank you very much. But what we know now is that, listen, if our goal is to develop leaders who can advance technology and improve the human condition, if we want to expand access, and if that talent, listen, we live in a city with more than half of the population is Black. Black students at Georgia Tech barely reach 7%. Something is not working there. We cannot just sit back and say, hey, not our problem, it's K to 12. We have to figure out, the world has more women than men. Georgia Tech has only 40% women in the undergraduate. Something is happening, and we cannot just say, not our problem, go talk to K to 12. So we're now active in that space. We have Seismic, we have Project Engages. Even GTRI is providing tools for high schools throughout the state to improve teaching of computer science. How do we empower teachers? How do we carry the message to that middle school girl, to that Black kid, say, yes, absolutely, you can be. You love physics, you love math, we want you to become an engineer. You should consider these things. So I think we're evolving in our thinking. We have evolved. We need to do a lot better in saying, yes, what happens in the sort of upstream in the pipeline is our problem.
Other questions? A bunch of questions. I'm not sure who to.
You want to take a few?
First. I think I saw your hand.
Hi, I'm Ellen Zagora, Georgia Tech, a computer scientist. Sometimes we count our ranks with the engineers and sometimes we don't. Brian's lucky he gets to count on both sides. Thanks very much to C21U for organizing this panel. I suspect this is a rare event to have these presidents all together in one place, and it's really been a treat to hear you talking. I wanted to change the title of the session just a little bit and and then ask you to respond to that. I'm just going to change a few words here. So I'm going to keep the civic role, but I want to change it to of R1 universities, because I think we all recognize that a huge amount of what we do at R1 universities is R, right? It's research. We are educators first and foremost, but second most, or even on par first most, we are researchers. And what is the civic role of R1 universities in a changing, and now I want to change this to societal landscape. What are our opportunities, and I think the obligations are perhaps more clear. The question is, how do we act on them? How do we act on our responsibilities to societal challenges as not just educators, but researchers? And I've spent a lot of time working on computing and social good, and trying to bring other researchers along to that space. It's not an easy task, and so I'd really love to hear you talk about the civic role of research universities, and not just the changing demographics of education, but the changing societal landscape. Thank you.
I'll kick that off. Thanks for the question, because a lot of conversations in higher education focus on the students, and we need to focus on the students. But we are all research universities, so thank you for directing a question that way. Let me just give 3 examples from Emory. At the core of Emory College is the humanities and the liberal arts, and that is so important to understanding who we are, our society, our history. And what I'm seeing among our faculty increasingly is scholars becoming more public. And I hate the term public intellectual, because intellectual in today's world has such negative connotations. But being public about the importance of their work. And I'll just pick one of a number of examples I could select. Carol Anderson, Dr. Carol Anderson is chair of Emory's Department of African American Studies. Last year, she published, I think, her 3rd or 4th book, I've lost count, titled The Second. It's about the Second Amendment and the history of the Second Amendment. How more timely can that be in what's happening now with gun violence and these very, very difficult issues that we as a country have struggled with and will continue to struggle with, and understanding what is the history of the Second Amendment, not what's the rhetoric about the Second Amendment, what is the history? And universities, echoing what Ángel said, are the only institutions where we can have faculty that can devote their careers to posing answers and studying through research and through scholarship these questions. So that's one example. Now I'll go to healthcare. We're, again, very proud at Emory with not only the treatments and the role of our researchers and scientists in the vaccine development, but the therapeutics, and using science to actually treat people with diseases that are affecting them. And so our scientists developed one of the 2 therapeutics approved by the FDA, molnupiravir, and just our 2 universities together, just this past week, got a $52 million grant from the NIH to develop platforms for treatments for the next pandemic, and whatever it may be, to create flexible, rapidly deployed therapeutics to be able to be ready when we're going to have another pandemic. That can only take place in universities. That is the kind of research that affects society. And then AI came up here. Well, I'm a failed computer scientist at several points in my career. I don't know what computing in the future is going to be, but whatever it is, it's going to be called artificial intelligence. and it's going to have tremendous impacts on society. Huge technology questions. I think we're just beginning to see the technology of AI, and it's changed over the past 30 years. It will change over the next 30 years. But now it is affecting everything we do and affecting every part of society. And it's, I love Google. I use for lots of things. Lots of things are running on AWS. It's going to be research that is going to be posing these questions and developing the solutions on some very difficult ethical, sociological, societal and political issues having to do with computing affecting everything we do in life.
Can I add to that? And I thank you, Ellen, for bringing our conversation in that direction. I have 3 ideas. One is we should really more intentionally start directing research efforts to the problems that matter. And we were able to do it during COVID. When things got really, really scary, everybody, I saw it happen overnight at Georgia Tech. It was amazing. Computer scientists were building systems. Systems engineers and statisticians, physicists were doing models of public health. Mechanical engineers were building PPE and frugal innovations in respirators. Everybody was on task, and we kind of killed it, guys. I mean, on the testing thing is a great example, but we saw it. We can do it. Well, they're equally pressing issues, and we better get ourselves organized to addressing them. I mean, what we're doing to our planet, the destruction of biodiversity, the heating of our climate with really scary and still in many ways unpredictable implications. We better understand how we slow this thing down, how we prepare for the effects of what's already the damage that has already been done. We have issues of healthcare pending in the horizon, of economic opportunity, of even the strength of our democracy, issues of security, cybersecurity that are essential. So these are big problems. And I think one of the very important things we can do in places like Georgia Tech, how do we intentionally organize ourselves to deal with those big problems? Number 2 is, and Georgia Tech, again, taught me that, because I was an engineer, and then I did my PhD in psychology. All these big problems are not just about technology. We killed it with the vaccine. We, the global we. We produced this mRNA vaccine, which was science fiction based on decades of work in labs in places like ours. And all of a sudden, people were refusing to put their darn vaccine because they were getting crap information online, and because we were unable to deal with the psychology of getting a vaccine done. Think about it. I mean, we can come up with the best technology in the world. If we don't understand the sociological, the ethical, the policy, the implications of these things, we're not going anywhere. So that combination, bringing in that human side into the research is absolutely essential. Third thing, I couldn't agree with you more, Greg. We need to embrace our role as public intellectuals. We need to be storytellers. We need to have our voices heard. It's too late when COVID hits, and all of a sudden, the person who has the biggest microphone in the world has no interest in sharing the truths coming from science, and we have no megaphone because we didn't think it was important enough. Mm-hmm. And now no one is listening. It's too late for it. We need to prepare those megaphones now. We need to turn, I know not every scientist is going to be a powerful storyteller, but many can be. I mean, we're right now, interestingly, we're planning a pilot with National Geographic. I don't know if we'll get it organized for this summer, but to have a group of faculty champions and say, can we do a seminar, a workshop with National Geographic in terms of at least empower some of our own colleagues to become powerful storytellers. So those would be my 3 suggestions.
I know you want another one. Just very quickly. Thank you, Ellen, for the question, and good seeing you, actually. I would say quickly, quick commercial. Today we were going to announce our RISE Awards, which is Research Excellence and Scholarly Excellence Awards, where we made a $2.5 million contribution to sort of discretionary ideas within the community. And then we had 38 proposals. I saw them. And I've never seen such a group of proposals informed culturally and also civically. So One of the things and it'll be out today, but I welcome you to take a look at that. It's one of the things that was just amazing were the number of proposals and solutions that came in the area of data analytics and health disparity. You talked about AI. One of them is trustworthy AI. How do you do it in such a way that it doesn't bias a certain population? There's this I think this is more urban myth, but this historically, one of the areas in image recognition where they said it wasn't well enough informed by cultural differences was like when you go in the bathroom and the water turns on. They said it wasn't well prepared. I think someone told me that was an urban myth, but it was such a great story. But basically what they're saying is that it didn't have enough sample data to understand, melanin in your hand versus non-melanin in your hand. So that piece on some of our urban campuses, how we integrate with businesses and government, we really have sort of a unique perspective on this, and it shows in kind of the research that we do. So, and I think that's a responsibility for us to take that. You talked about tenure, talked about independence. We got to take that and use it so that we don't let our individual differences limit our technology or our innovation.
I know there was a ton more questions out there. I'm going to let Brittany pick.
Oh gosh, there's a lot.
I'm Dixon from Georgia Tech. When you think about the landscape, you talked about the enrollment cliff, you talked about the noise in regards to going to college. As a leader, are you nervous or have any reservations about the direction that we're heading in?
Let me clarify, with regards to the enrollments falling off, or?
In regards to the enrollments falling off, the potential of folks exiting college, when you think about diversity, equity, anything keeping you up at night?
Oh, yes, but I would say you're right. I think my concern, I think what keeps me up at night is not so much our inability to kind of adapt to this. It's our inertia for change. It's like that's what's most, can be most difficult. It's just, can we be agile enough in the face of something that happens more quicker, more rapidly than academic pace to change. The thing that most concerns me at Georgia State also would be, always keeps me up is just the safety of our students, whether it's mental or physically. So how do we create an environment that, I have a son going to college next year, and I look at him and I'm like, gosh, it's been my responsibility to keep you safe, and now I've got to, I'm gonna turn that over, and this is a period of time before that maturity really kicks in. I think. I mean, it hadn't kicked in yet, but he's gonna, go anyway. So I have that feeling, that natural feeling about, 8,000 new students coming in. They're like my son, and how do I prepare them? How do I make sure they don't stomp out after year one? How do I fulfill the aspirations of all my faculty and staff who also want greater things in the light of all those students coming in? So just change is so hard, and it's not, there's no YouTube video to help you with this. And it's living, it changes on you. I think that's both frustrating, and that's a fear. Have I done enough? That's the big thing.
Yeah, I'm really curious. I like the what keeps you up at night question, and I think that was in the context of maybe enrollment cliff, and you went to care for students. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, President Cabrera and President Fenvis, what does keep you up at night?
Well, let me lead off, and because Ángel has already talked about some of the polling data that we have access to. We see about how people view our universities, our business, higher education, college, and I'll go back to even a little bit more in history. So the Gallup organization, I think you may have seen these regular surveys they do about trust in institutions. And you can track Gallup polls on trust in institutions, I think going back to the 50s or certainly the 60s. And there's been, especially in the recent 10 to 20 years, a decline of the public trust in almost all institutions. The ordering changes. The military is usually high up. Congress is near the bottom. Historically, universities, colleges and universities have been pretty high up in institutions, the public trust. And that has been changing. It's been changing probably for at least a decade, maybe a little bit longer. But what the Gallup polls have also shown is, and now I'm at a private university, maybe I can get into politics a little bit, is a partisan divide and trust in institutions, and especially for the first time, a partisan divide and trust in colleges and universities. And a couple of years ago, I was talking to a senior vice president at Gallup, and they said as they've been doing these tracking surveys of trust in institutions, when trust became partisan, it never went back. And so that's what keeps me up at night. Now, is that going to happen, in the next 2 years, the next 5 years? I don't know, but that long-term trend is deeply concerning to me. And I think it should be deeply concerning to everybody who understands the role that higher education has for individuals, for our communities, and in society.
So yes to both. Those two issues keep me awake many nights. In maybe following up on both the issues of student mental health, which were a big issue before the pandemic, and they're an even worse, most prevalent and more impactful issue after the pandemic. But on this last issue, it does. So this is a phone call or an email that all of us get regularly, and it starts, and you see it coming. By the way, you open the email, sometimes a letter. You read the first letter, and you're like, here we go again. There's nobody who's a stronger defendant of freedom of speech than I am, period. However, and the person comes to protest something that a faculty has written, or a visitor that has spoken on campus that in their view shouldn't have. They cross the line. They should have no room in our university. And that's becoming very, very prevalent. And by the way, this is equal opportunity. You get it sometimes from someone who's more liberal, who's very upset. Sometimes it's from someone who's conservative. I have scars from all sides, and I actually named a law school after Antonin Scalia. I'm still getting my trolls on social media. Mm-hmm. I am getting equal protests for other kinds of things. We did something apparently terrible last year, which is we had the Secretary of State of our country speak on campus. Apparently some people thought that shouldn't have happened. I mean, we have to take this very seriously as communities, guys, because this is what's causing a lot of skepticism in this partisan divide that you hear. This feeling that universities are becoming one-sided politically, that somehow we're becoming not open to certain type of thinking, especially conservative thinking in our campuses, that students are somehow indoctrinated when they come to our campus. These are real concerns. They show up in the polls, show up in conversations, show up in political debates. We have a huge responsibility. We are the last remaining sites in a hugely polarized society, where it's not just the media that we watch and the social media that we go to, it's also even the neighborhoods we live in. I mean, I live in a neighborhood where there was one Trump yard sign, and that sign has disappeared. I mean, we are in these, but the only remaining places where you can really have all ideas come together in debate and do what we need to do as universities. So we as communities, we have to keep each other in check. Make sure we are indeed delivering on that promise of being spaces where all ideas can have a place, that can be debated, they can enrich our ways of thinking, so that we can do a better job, because that's a big part of what we do as higher education leaders, of actually keeping the shots out of our communities. Right? Like, let us do our job. It's hugely important for our universities, but we also need to do better ourselves.
And if it's okay, I'm just going to make a pitch for the conversation you had with
Greg Lukianov, yeah.
Greg Lukianov, and I think for the Georgia Tech community, it's on YouTube. It was an hour-long conversation around freedom of speech. It's freedom of speech on campus, and I think I would encourage everybody to watch that. It was a really remarkable hour, really, really candid and really insightful hour. Brittany, I'm going to have you pick.
Good morning. I'm Howard Wertheimer. I appreciate the conversations and the candid remarks. As an architect, I recognize the importance of place, and you've all talked about that. We've heard about the enrollment cliff. The mayor talked about circles of inclusion and access. What have you learned from the pandemic to reach more undergraduate students?
Well, I'll start and say it's interesting, and I mentioned earlier this idea of in residence but still online. I think what I've found is that we have to transform the classroom so that it's more hybrid in some ways. So we concentrate more on discussion sessions and maker spaces and thought sessions than we do on lecture. I think about my PhD program, and I had a math professor, and this probably will date me, but he had a overhead projector. So
I used one of those.
Oh yeah. So he would come in, right, and he came in with like at least 50 blank sheets of transparencies, and he would. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh yeah. I can't remember who it was. I think it was in my PhD. And he would come in and he would write on the transparency. It would project on the board, and he wore glasses. So the light made like this horn. So we called him, Professor Satan or something. We had some name for it. But all class long, just writing, and it just, the engagement was there. Many times, you try to get just, copies of what he'd written, because it was just not, it was so monotone. It was very, very painful in that way. I think the way we converted to online was not different than that. It was, there probably were, 20 million so talking heads on cameras. So I think what we learned is we got to figure out how to get that engagement right. I'll tell you, we have a great opportunity though. Companies are particularly coming back. So and I don't know if it'll continue at the pace, but they are really downsizing their place. I think that's such a wonderful opportunity. I think we all should be thinking in this light. So we should downsize our lecture space. They downsize their office space. And then we upsize our maker space, our discussion space, our third space, and they come and live with us. And then all of a sudden, we have a true community of scholars that transcends our faculty, our students, our staff, as well as having this natural connection to whether it's local business, local government, nonprofits. So I've been talking about this. One of my 4 pillars is identity and placemaking. It's very much saying, let's co-brand our space, let's co-brand our curriculum such that it's so woven into the community that our students get this genuine, authentic experience with real life while they're matriculating. So I think for me, I've learned to kind of really take advantage of space and then also think more deeply about, how we project our curriculum.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation taking place by our faculty for exactly some of the reasons Brian talked about. I was talking with an English professor at Emory when they went online, and I wasn't here quite at that time, but he said he completely redid his whole way of teaching. And that's transferred back to in-person teaching. So I think it's caused a lot of innovation of how do we use that valuable in-person time to the biggest learning advantage for the students. There's lots of other things that are part of education, reading, problem solving, projects. Let's use that class time that is most valuable. And I think that's to me, is one of the most important lasting lessons from this natural experiment. I don't see us going back to talking heads. I think we've learned that doesn't work. And that we have to use our rooms. I mean, a room like this may be fine for an event like this. It may not be very good for actually teaching. And so I think we're seeing a lot of changes taking place. We're doing some reconfiguration of our teaching spaces because the traditional lecture, we are probably not using that 50 minutes 3 times a week very effectively.
Thank you, and thanks to all 3 of you and for Provost McLaughlin for moderating such a great panel, and President Blake, it's great to see you again. So we've talked a lot about DEI, and I looked online this morning, and the K through 12 public school student population is across the United States is 15% Black and 28% Hispanic. I was one of I was really unusual at Georgia Tech. I transferred in, not really, but that's another story. And I am Cuban American. I'm dyslexic. I have ADHD. I got extra time on tests. And I graduated with a 3.1 GPA. And so when I was recruited back as a school chair, I really couldn't believe it. Right? Talk about imposter syndrome. Like, they're giving me an office here at Georgia Tech, and they're putting me in charge of a school. But at Georgia Tech, every 2 or 3 weeks, I had someone say, "Have you changed your major yet from computer science to something more easy?" And that was really, like, everybody kept telling me that you just can't make it. This is not for you. And luckily, I'm extremely stubborn, which I think a lot of you know, and that helped me. But not everyone is that way. And I was determined to graduate even if people didn't think I could make it, and even if I hated computer science, just to prove them wrong. So, and it's probably why I'm a computer scientist, I had to admit, but it is what it is. And I love my field, and it's been great. But there's a lot of students who we're not reaching out to and who we're not properly supporting. And so I like to think that there are a lot of kids like me who weren't great students, but can actually really succeed and have a lot of impact in their career and in this country. And so I always really go overboard in terms of everything we can do to support those students. But I admit, I have not done a great job of recruiting Hispanic students. And it should be easier for me, and it's not. And it's clear that our populations of students and demographics of our student don't reflect the student body across the country, and nor do our faculty. And Dorothy Yancey was my only female professor at Georgia Tech, just one. So I didn't have role models here that were women either. And so we've come a long way. But I wanted to ask you all, what can we do to incentivize professors to more actively do outreach and do things from recruiting to working on the pipeline to working on mental health or to supporting students who have different learning styles? And so I don't think we're incentivizing that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you, Annie. So this is one of the reasons I had such great experience at Tech. So I'd say for me, there was one thing we did that, and it comes from President Cabrera comments about telling our story. So when I was provost in a previous life, we wanted to get our story out more, and we wanted to do it in ways that faculty could do it kind of most natural and most seamless. So I think we called it 1,000 touches. So we asked each school or department to come up with at least 10 touches, whether it's in K through 12, career fairs or at the K through 12 level, YMCA, libraries. We just asked them, say, look, just share your story in the way, and basically an academic story. Share what you're working on in any of these spaces. And we just kind of kept track, and we were like, okay, and we said we'd do at least 3 of them local, 3 of them in the state, and 3 of them in a different state. And gosh, it got such impact because we were able to track where they had the conversations and then see how our applications were changing over that time. And then we could also see based on what demographics they address. So I think we have to make sure that we're not an island or isolated on our own, but we actually work to make sure that our story is out as broadly as we can make it. And I think faculty have a unique way of doing that, already know how to speak to students, already know how to tell their story. So that was one area, but I think it's really hard to do it in spaces where the demographics of the community don't particularly reflect. So.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a tough one to answer. We're having lots of conversations at Emory among the faculty. We had a lot at the University of Texas. And I think it comes down to what do we value in our faculty? Where do we expect them to be spending their time? And how is that recognized in advancement, promotions, endowed chairs, all the normal measures of faculty excellence. And having talked with a lot of faculty, my previous institution here at Emory, especially African American faculty, we don't have enough Hispanic faculty. There is they certainly feel in a justified way they're expected to do these types of things, outreach, mentoring, recruitment, and they're not being recognized for it. So I don't have the solution yet. Lots of active discussions. I'm still relatively new at Emory. I know at the University of Texas, there's lots of discussions of how do we properly weight this in the decisions that are important to faculty, again, on advancement and on promotion. And I think that's happening probably here at Georgia Tech and every other university. If we really expect our faculty to do this important work, the question is how do we recognize it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm the proud father of a computer science major who graduated this past weekend from college. A woman, I forgot that part. And so I've seen her journey. I've seen her be in middle school and come home and having discovered that computer science is for boys. And looking at her journey and how she ended up majoring in computer science and trying to learn from that journey, there are a couple of things. One, it was just her brother who loved computer science, came to Georgia Tech, and he's the one who told her, you're the smartest person I know. God damn it, you're going to do computer science. You're perfect for this. And that had her attention. But then we would take her, Beth would take her. I have to give her credit. I do these sessions with women in technology every 3 weeks. And all of a sudden she was there looking at the, senior vice president for Microsoft, the CIO of the Washington Post, you name it, these badass women who are like not just doing computer science, they're leading organizations. It works. We know what it works. I've seen the project engages that we organize here when we bring kids from Atlanta Public Schools and they join a lab and they get their lab coat. Those kids, the thing is, if you're never exposed, if you don't see anybody in your family, anybody who looks like you, who's doing this, how in the world can you imagine yourself doing that? So we know what it works. We just have to organize ourselves to get it done. And unfortunately, while the numbers change, Greg is right. I cannot send that message to the middle school girl the same way you can, right? So that means all of a sudden the burden is going to be more on you than on me, and because we have fewer women than men in computer science, unfortunately, you're going to get a bigger part of the burden. Same thing is going to happen if you're a black engineer. If we want to inspire our kids in Atlanta Public Schools to do engineering, I'm sorry, but I don't know that Steve cannot do that as well as Raheem can, or Charles. So I think those issues about if that is the case, if there's going to be a disproportionate burden, and this is important for us, we'd better recognize it. So I think that's something we need to, do.
We're at time.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to thank President Fenves, President Blake, President Cabrera for all of your time. We touched on a whole bunch of different topics and really, really grateful for all your insights and time. So thank you all.
Awesome.